So this year's Chief Economists Forum is discussing, this is the title, Job Creation in Africa, Constraints and Policy Options. Let me bring our guests for this discussion today, Andrew Dabalen, Chief Economist, Africa Region at the World Bank, and Pamela Nakamba, Economic Advisor to the Zambian President. Lady and gent, thank you for coming. When I got this story, I was saying to my colleagues that this is one of the best initiatives that I have seen in terms of trying to get Africa to coordinate, be it economic policy or thoughts on how to create employment, or indeed just trying to find better ways of developing the continent. So I wanted to begin, if I can, Andrew, with you, by just perhaps explaining the thinking behind gathering these economic minds that you had in Lusaka.
Godfrey, thank you so much, and it's great to be with you. So the idea of the Chief Economists of Government came together about 5 years ago. And the reason why we formed this network is because we realized that the economic policy, and especially the people who are charged with advising executives of African governments, are asked to solve very complicated and, very complex problems in economic policy. And often they're usually isolated, relatively lonely, and they don't actually have a large group of people working for them. So what we thought would be useful is if we actually get together a group of people who are trying to deal with the same kinds of problems and create a network where they can feel safe to be able to exchange ideas, to become sounding boards for each other, to share materials, to get best practices, and to learn from each other, and to also provide a basis for support to each other. And I think it has been going on for 5 years. It's become very useful and actually a very active network of chief economists of government.
Over the past 2 days, you have had a packed schedule. So if you can pack in a few minutes or so, just the agenda that you had and the outcomes that you guys were able to come up with. So
what we did this time, we thought, there are a lot of problems that African countries are facing all the time. There are debt issues, there are growth issues. But if you actually ask a lot of African policymakers, whether that is the head of government, the prime minister, the president, even ministers, or even just thought leaders, the one thing that is on the top of their list is jobs, and specifically how to create good, secure jobs. And so we thought that this year we will get together these minds, bright economists who are chief economists of government, who are advisors to the presidents and prime ministers of our republics, to get together and to actually share ideas about how Africa can begin to solve this intractable problem, which will become even more difficult because, as you said, the working age population in Africa will double from 640 million now to almost 1.3 billion in about 20 plus years.
Absolutely. Pamela, if I can come to you, you were sitting at the table. From a Zambian perspective, key learnings for you?
Thank you so much. The topic of job creation, which we looked at this week, was around various themes, sub-themes, which are simply constraints to job creation in Africa. And these were the industrial policy itself, finance, access to finance and financial sector development, and infrastructure. And the key learning issues for me, where I'm sitting from Zambia, was, I think, around, first of all, the industrial policy. And the main highlight here was that instead of African countries focusing on single industrial policy anchored on a particular ideology, the best way is to focus on, of course, having a strategic direction, but then focusing on a series of transformational policies, production policies, which you implement and incorporate learning as you go on. really this kind of pushing the narrative that there isn't a single blueprint for industrialization. It's something you have to look at strategically and take various policies to unlock various blockages in the economy to job creation. Yeah. That was a very key learning for me and from Zambia as well, where I'm sitting from. And this is something we're even implementing in Zambia to try and remove all the blockages to economic activity and therefore blockages to job creation. And when you look at infrastructure, especially for Africa as a whole, this is one of the major challenges that we are facing today. We know that Africa has not invested adequately in energy infrastructure. Yeah. And so you have a number of countries facing shortages of electricity, shortages of energy, and there you have the load shedding and all power of power rationing. Yeah. And now you find that even where countries are in a surplus in Africa, yeah, you cannot move that energy to countries with a deficit because we have not invested in enough infrastructure just to transmit and move that power. Yeah. And if we're going to create jobs, these are some of the issues we need to unlock. Yeah. We need to invest in adequate energy infrastructure. We need to invest in transport infrastructure, such as railway, such as aviation, because these are the levers. When you push, you are able to sort of reduce the cost of business to the private sector, who in turn have to create the good quality jobs that Africa needs. So these were some of the key takeaways. Of course, we have access to finance, which is a traditional constraint, I think, throughout, and the development of the financial sector to provide the appropriate financing to the private sector to create these jobs. And from here, one of the takeaways is that there are areas in Africa where they're in a surplus for finance. Yeah. But in that area, probably they don't have enough adequate pipeline for investment. So this financing needs to move to areas in Africa. So we need to work together as African countries to have to move around this infrastructure, this financing to where it's required by working together.
Yeah. Did you find consensus in terms of that working together, because here you are being convened under the umbrella of the World Bank. But from an African perspective, do you think perhaps we need another platform where you guys also meet and try and coordinate policy outside, of course, of the political policymakers?
Yes, first of all, what this platform has done really is to encourage now ourselves, even without the World Bank, to engage each other either bilaterally or as a group of countries to engage and discuss the various, how we can work together. And I think this is already happening. For instance, when we appear as Africans, maybe before various platforms such as the COP28, I think there is now a way of coming together to have a common position, because as economic advisors to the various executives in these countries, our executives who appear before these international platforms, and we want them to speak in a coordinated, in one voice. So we are being encouraged now to tap into each other, work together so that we have a coordinated voice as our countries appear before this platform. So this is already happening, even without the World Bank presence, because this is what they have inculcated in us, to work together, to reach out to one another.
Yeah. And Andrew, we're running out of time, unfortunately, and really would have loved to have you for longer. But I wanted to ask what happens to the policy recommendations or discussions, outcomes that you have at this platform?
We hope will happen when we have these policy recommendations now is that, since these are people, these are economists who are very close to the key policymakers in each one of these countries, they will begin to actually have deliberations. There will be the there will be the whisperers, right, of the presidents and the prime ministers. And so if they can begin to actually push some of these policies, whether this is, as Pamela said, whether these are policies to try and fix the utilities, especially power utilities, whether these are policies to try and coordinate, basically joint projects along transport corridors and so on, to begin to actually try and implement them and unlock, productivity and jobs in the continent.
Absolutely. And it's certainly one, I think, where perhaps all of us can also follow up and ask the question, when you went to Lusaka and you discussed, what did you take out of it and what have you done about it? Andrew, unfortunately, we've run out of time. That's Andrew Dabalen, Chief Economist, Africa Region at the World Bank, joined in this discussion by Pamela and Nakamba, Economic Advisor to the Zambian President. To both of you, thank you for your time. Let me wrap up our markets here in Johannesburg. I was just trying to watch on the TV screen in front of me here if the election of the president has happened. It hasn't.